Welcome to The Optimistic American. This is Dr. Emily Basha, and I'm here today to interview Paul Johnson on his wealth of knowledge and experience and expertise, not just on the intersectionality of politics and business, but really how to become an entrepreneur. What are the stepping stones and the foundations that you need as a listener if you're thinking about starting your own business? So tune into this episode for hope and to help you overcome your fears if you're thinking about starting your own business. So, Paul, you've been successful in business. You have multiple businesses that you've done in your history. You've got, I don't even know how many different businesses to your name. You've got commercial real estate and residential real estate. You've got a healthcare company that you own. You also have been the mayor of Phoenix. You're heavily invested and involved passionately in politics. You've worked with his State Department all over the world, and yet, you know, there is this drive in you. What is the connection for you between your work and investment in politics and in business?
Yeah, you're making me sound really old. I feel like I have a head that might have wore out 3 or 4 bodies at this point.
Accomplished. Accomplished.
Well, I've definitely packed in a lot, and I've always felt like that was important to me, to be able to get as much done as I could. I went into politics at a very young age. I think I became a council person at 24, 25 years old, and I became mayor at 29 or 30. I love doing it. I got to do some gigs with the State Department. I went to Poland to help them establish their first local governments after the Soviet Union fell. And I also was able to go to Saudi Arabia and study what was going on with the oil cartels. I gained a great understanding of how the community works, and I'll always feel like I owe an incredible debt to the taxpayers. They gave me an incredible education. I love politics. I still enjoy it. I still enjoy spending time on it. A lot of our podcasts are talking about, obviously, international issues. But if you look at business, almost all of the great things that are going to happen in the upcoming decades, they're not going to come from government. Government, quite simply, have put themselves in a position for a variety of reasons. One is huge deficit spendings, economic issues. It's going to be very difficult for them to be the ones that are solving the major problems of mankind. Now, here's what government does do well. What the greatest thing our government ever did. Our government's been involved in building bridges and dams and roadways. We built public schools. Certainly those were important. Police stations, fire stations. We've even put a man on the moon. But the single greatest thing that our government ever did is it empowered the individual over itself. Now, I say that a lot. What does that mean, right? Well, when you're going to go focus on a problem, one way to focus on it in a state-controlled economy is the state says, here's a problem, we're going to go focus on it. We're going to decide how much capital we're going to put into it, how much capital resources that we're going to put into it. And because they don't really understand the market, even when it's failing, they keep pouring money into it. It is a very inefficient way to solve problems, and it takes money away from other problems, which may be even more important. It's just that government hasn't caught on to it. And then oftentimes government, what we saw with Russia and China was, once they began to fail, then they covered up the fact that people were starving to death in their systems. They lost 20, 30 million people just through starvation. In the United States, we empowered the private sector over government. Both the 5th and the 14th Amendment outline property rights as being an actual right of human beings. Those rights guaranteed that you could own what it was that you created. It also ensured that if you invested in something and it made money, you would get that return. That ended up giving us an incredible ability to deal with the issues that are important to human progress. When we identify a problem, the private sector has an immense ability to be able to solve it. Now, think about this. Driverless vehicles. What are driverless vehicles going to solve? It's probably going to wipe out the DWI industry. Mm-hmm. It's probably going to wipe out a lot of the problems in our traffic courts. It may save literally tens of thousands of people from death and millions more from being maimed, right? We know that there are smart traffic controls that can be put into place with automated driving that help. Okay, who's going to do all this? The private sector, right? The private sector is going to do it. They're not only going to end up having driverless cars, they're going to end up creating cures to cancer. We may even extend human life. The things that are going to come out of the private sector are going to be the things that move mankind's progress dramatically forward. And that to me is the interest. I mean, why go into politics? Because I want to solve big problems. I wanted to be able to be involved in the big problems that existed. Here's what became clear to me after being there, after watching the private sector work. It was the private sector that was doing most of the working. They were the ones taking the risk, putting in capital into things that may work or may not work. And they were accomplishing amazing results. Government is good when you have something that unless government takes part in it, it won't be delivered fairly. So as an example, a police department, right? If you ran a police department based upon demand, well, the highest demand are in the poorest neighborhoods. Okay, well, how are they going to pay you? Well, they're not going to pay you. They don't have the money to pay you. All right. Well, if you want to take care of those problems, you create a system where government ends up basically subsidizing it. My answer is, in some cases, government needs to do that. We certainly need to do that in defense. We need to do that in police departments. I think that we need to do it in public education. I also believe, though, that even in public education, there's a role for the private sector. These charter schools, we're getting groups like Basha and Great Hearts in Arizona that are doing unbelievable jobs at educating children for actually a cheaper price than public schools. But government's still playing a role. It's collecting taxes, and then it's distributing the money back out. The private sector is the place where we're really going to be able to make a difference. And what I've tried to do in my career is I've tried to pick out big problems. I picked out, one of the problems I picked out was right after I left the mayor's office, I had worked on a committee. You're too young to remember it, but there was kind of a joke back at the time where Al Gore had taken credit for creating the internet. Well, that basically came from a committee that they were involved with that was designed to create the new infrastructure when we began to deregulate the bell companies. It was clear to me that those bell companies, that when we deregulated them, that our spending would dramatically increase. And in fact, it went from about $50 billion a year to $750 billion a year. I built a company that ended up helping take that infrastructure out around the country, in some cases across the oceans. Right? We did that by figuring out what were the inefficiencies, what were the problems, what was it that these companies needed to be done to be able to make that work. And in the process, I ended up having to create dozens of companies with my partners because we needed rooftop rights to be able to shoot cellular lines. We needed to be able to dig trenches in public right-of-ways. We needed to be able to do splicing of companies and of fiber optics cable. We needed to be able to put up 5E switches. In each one of those cases, I created a new company, brought in a partner who was exceptional at doing that piece. Now, I got lucky. I sold the company in 1999 for a variety of reasons. My brothers and I all got a great return on our investment. But I say I got lucky. The dot-com crash happened in 2001, and I think of our 35 customers, 34 of them filed bankruptcy. So I just put that into the luck category that we were out at the point in time that happened. But it was amazing to be involved with that when all of those changes were taking place, when we were dramatically shifting how our communications was going to work. The problem that I see today is healthcare. By the way, anything that's regulated by government becomes much more complex to try to change, right? Because there are regulations that are in place that are designed to keep that from happening. My partners and I, Dr. Janice Johnston and Dr. Berg, created a company called Redirect Health. And our goal was to help companies who had low wage employees be able to extend healthcare to them as well as their high-wage employees. Most companies do a great job of providing for healthcare for high-wage employees. There's probably not a law firm in any town that there's not some great healthcare program that's put together for the lawyers. But if you're a stucco company or a restaurant or a painting company, those groups have a very hard time being able to extend healthcare out to the lower wage employees because it's not affordable. Just quite simply, it's not affordable. We've tried to create an option for them. We haven't tried to. We have. We're now in all 50 states where we are selling a healthcare product that's utilized by employees or employers all over the country for employees. And we work very hard at hiring the right providers to make certain that we can help triage the issues that are happening in each one of those states. We are still a healthcare company, but we have a national platform that we're working from. And we're making a change in the industry. We're changing who it is that can get affordable care. So to me, that's what business does. You figure out a problem that a customer has, and you try to find a way to solve it.
Which was the passing of the Affordable Care Act, and you saw that the problem happening for the business owners really in a moderate-sized business.
Well, the Affordable Care Act was helpful in that it allowed individuals to be able to create a standardized type of care that they could get through the Affordable Care Act. The reality is what they completely missed was how do you reduce costs? In fact, nothing happened that helped it reduce costs. If you look at companies like United Healthcare and Blue Cross Blue Shield and others, you'd see that their numbers, in fact, their stock prices, the ones that were public companies, went through the roof during those periods of time. Why? Well, because the cost of care became more expensive. And they were based upon, I think it's a 14% profit margin they were allowed underneath the ACA. If expenses went up, their profit went up. All right. I've always argued that if you could really cut down the cost of healthcare by 50%, you'd bankrupt most of the major public companies that are involved in the ACA. Right. Their profit, while it would still be 14%, it'd be based off of a much lower number. Employers were caught in the mix on that. And the easy answer for them was just quit providing it or only provide it for my high wage employees. What we wanted to do was to give them an advantage to be able to create a product for their low-wage employees that would help them recruit, that would help them retain employees, but that also was affordable and that gave them an ability to be able to save money on other items. When you don't have health care, here's your two greatest options. Utilize a public hospital for free because even though they'll send you a bill, you won't have to pay it. They can't deny you coverage. Or two, utilize your workers' compensation. Well, groups that are on workers' comp that have a flexible rate, a rate that's based upon the actual experience of their company, have found that as their employees will, when they don't have coverage, they'll utilize that workers' comp, and that drives up their experiential rate, and that drives up their cost. And it can be a huge difference to a company. Again, looking at the problem and solving it was what we saw as being necessary. Now, on the other side, when you talk to doctors, and we've been in the primary care business for 30 some years, what we knew is that, on deductibles, providers about 25 to 30% of the time never collect the deductible after applying to collect it 2 or 3 times with with debt collectors and with others. We knew that they had an administrative expense to try to collect that. We knew that they had 85,000 CPT codes, meaning when you come in, they have to apply a CPT code to you, and then they have to submit that to the insurance company. And if it's wrong, the insurance company sends it back. And about 25% of the time, the insurance company rejects it. And on the second and third and fourth times, it's about 50% of those that end up being rejected. Make that payment system easier for them.
So much administrative costs.
They could reduce their cost, right? And so the point is this. You figure out a problem and you tackle it. Why business and politics? It's the same thing, right? And in fact, it's in the private sector where we're going to have a greater chance to be able to make a difference.
Yeah, I feel like you're making a stronger argument and advocating for really entering into business if you want to make a change or promote some kind of progressiveness or innovation.
If you look at what's going to happen in society, in every market, there's a served market, There's an overserved market and there's an underserved market. Now, the served market, there's a book called Red Ocean, Blue Ocean. The red ocean is the served market. You go into a served market, you're going to be competing with everybody else who's in that exact same space. And there's going to be a lot of blood in the water, right? The overserved market would be, maybe if you utilized an Excel spreadsheet, maybe there are groups of people who say, look, I really don't need all of those functions. I only need a few of those functions to be able to make it work. And with a few of those functions, I'd be able to store the data quicker. So that would be an overserved group. And if you can find a way to address them, that becomes helpful. But the real social cause is, how do you deal with the underserved market? The group of people who have no real access. Now, I happen to believe that all of our access is going to increase in almost every field because of technology. Technology begins to have a huge effect as products are, as they enter into a marketplace. The competition, and two, the technology begin to reduce the overall cost. There's an argument that a cell phone, if you took all the devices on a cell phone today and took it back just a little over a decade ago, that cell phone would cost you $90,000 a year to be able to own, right? Things like GPS now are included for free. Tech servicing is included for free. The phone call, there's a cost to the overall service, but all of those things have been incorporated into the phone at a much cheaper rate. That's democratizing it. That's providing more people with more access. We went to Africa. There are people in sub-Saharan Africa that all have a cell phone.
Yes,
right?
And they were sending messages on WhatsApp.
And they charge it up with a cell panel that they have at their home so that they can talk on it. And they can sell product, and they can buy product, and they can have product shipped. The amount of technology that's in your hand is dramatically changing things. And the more people that we can make both consumers and producers,
and you could operate a business,
the more people we're going to lift out of poverty. So almost on its own, the idea of democratizing and making things more affordable for the underserved market is going to happen. But again, I look at it and say the starting place for a business, if you really want to make a social change, is figure out a group of people who can't afford service because the costs are too high today, and figure out how to address that market. If you figure out how to address that market, the biggest challenges are going to produce the most wealthy people in America. How? Because the people who solve those problems are going to make a lot of money. Now, some people that bothers, but I always wonder, how much money should Steve Jobs have made? Or Bill Gates? How much should we have limited him to? When should we have told him it was time to stop? My own personal opinion is I never wanted them to stop. I wanted them to continue to innovate and to continue to figure out how to get their product out to more people and how to make it more efficient. Elon Musk, right? Same thing. I hope the very best for Elon Musk. Goodness gracious, this guy's trying to figure out how to go to Mars.
Yes.
Not with public sector money, with his money. And he's making changes along the way. But of course I want him to not only be a success, I'm hoping that he figures out how to take that product and apply it to more people. I bought one of his Teslas. You get that car down to $20,000, $25,000. That's transformational. And if he doesn't do it, somebody else will. And that somebody else will put him out of business. And it's probably going to be a 25-year-old kid that figures out how to do it, right? So it's the challenge for this generation. If you really want to make a change and move human progress forward, it's going to be the private sector where that happens. Now, government, they have a role. Here's the main role they have to play. Stay out of the way, right? Certainly, there are bad actors. There are bad things that happen. They need to make certain that they regulate in those areas, especially in banking. Not only have the problems that we've seen currently. I was on a bank board for a number of years, and I can tell you that banks, about 30 to 35% of all profits in the United States go to banks. Well, that's kind of being taken from the private sector in the provision of money. So it makes sense to me that banks are more regulated. But for most businesses, it's too inefficient for government to be making the choices. They need to allow the private sector to make the choices and then be careful about the bailouts that you create, because that creates moral hazards, meaning once people know there's a bailout, more people will say, well, that's really kind of a risk-free business, and they'll put money into it. The private sector needs to have moral guardrails. I'll tell you what those moral guardrails are. Bankruptcy. The fact that you'll fail if things don't go right. Now, the good news in our country is, even through bankruptcy, you're allowed to start over. We did that on purpose. We wanted to give people the ability to go into something, to fail, and to start again. That's not the same thing as bailing them out.
Yeah, and that those guardrails also include or protecting against criminal behavior and fraud
Absolutely.
and lying and cheating and stealing and all those other
So
things that can
when
come
the
with
SEC
business.
was formed, the Securities and Exchange Commission, it happened during the Depression, 1929. The Great Depression happened, and why did it happen? Well, because there were tons of people who were selling securities, meaning stocks and bonds, and they were selling them without giving the public good information, timely information, and accurate information. So people didn't have a real ability to gauge the value of a stock or of a bond. Today, the fundamental axioms that the Security and Exchange Commission is based upon is, number one, you have to give truthful information. The information you give has to be truthful if you're a public company taking public money. So people who are betting on it in the public sphere know that it's accurate. Number two, it has to be timely. All right, now, there's another answer to that. If you don't like those two rules, don't take money from the public market. Go do it with private money. Right? But in a public market where you have people investing grandma's pension fund, right, you need to have some rules put into place. And that's what the Securities and Exchange Commission was. It was a good set of rules that came about to make certain that companies were regulated, that were taking money out of the public sphere. By the way, there aren't that many companies that are actually public companies. I think I read the numbers like 3,000 companies, which is a drop in the bucket for the amount of companies that are out there. But they tend to be larger companies.
That makes sense. So, knowing through your history, there's been your wins, there's been your losses, you've made money, you've lost money, but yet you're right now financially stable, and yet you still work more than 60 hours a week. So what drives you? Why not relax? Why not retire? Why not do the status quo of what is expected? Writing.
You sound like you're
Writing
lobbying.
books.
Anyway, so let's see. Let's start with it's how I grew up, right? Look, I've been very lucky and fortunate, and again, I've been flush and thin. There's no doubt. I've been on both sides of the equation. But my family, my mother and father, they just weren't poor. They were dirt poor people. My mom grew up in the Appalachians of West Virginia and hitchhiked out here and picked cabbage in Levine. My father grew up in the coal mines of West Virginia, Pennsylvania, and he hitchhiked out here and went to work shining shoes. Right, they cobbled together a lifestyle and a life for their 9 children that they had. We all kind of grew up with a lot of love and with the belief that if you work hard and if you're willing to invest your time, your effort, yourself, that you have the right to be able to go out and take advantage of the great opportunities that are here. Now, my father always put a focus on going into business. I went into business at a very young age. I went into business when I was 19 years old. I can tell you in that business, I went through some hard times. I made some mistakes. Not everything that I did was perfect, but I learned a lot. And one of the things that I learned is the advantages that come to people who are willing to take risk, who are willing to be in business. I also learned that there are hardships that they face as well. Personally, I recommend business. Well, you know that I mentor a lot of people. I help a lot of people who have decided to go into business. Also something I do for free. I've never charged anybody to help mentor them. I don't want it to be my business. But the first reason I do it is because of my history. The second reason I do it is I'm at a stage where I want to give back. And I feel like there's a lot that I need to do to give back for all the benefits that I've received. our podcast is
Yeah.
partly about trying to give back to other people. This podcast is about trying to help them if they're thinking about going into business, or about how to make their existing business better, or why they might pick business in the first place. Our book is about trying to steer them away from these ideologies that can do so much damage to them and to their lives and to the people that they care about. But it's my way of giving back. And I've just learned to put in a lot of hours and to work hard. Honestly, I know it's work, but I like it. I like that lifestyle. I feel like I only have so many years on this planet, and I want to get everything out of it that I possibly can, and I want to give as much as I possibly can. You don't do that by sleeping in the mornings and by pampering yourself. You work and you try to focus. And the more that you focus, especially when it gets to helping other people, the more the need that's there that you see that needs to be covered. So it's it is my nature. I would also tell you that when going into business, I think people need to think about what is it that is the key for them in making that decision. Because while I made that decision, I know that it's really not right for everyone. But I do believe that you have to think about it in terms of, all right, if I'm going to take these steps, what are the key essential steps that I need to think about to be able to make it work? I had a very good friend of mine, and I won't mention any names of people just because I don't know how they would see the stories. But in one particular case, I had a friend who was making easily into the six figures. I had met him during the time that I was in office, and he saw me being in business, and he kind of wanted to do the same thing. But when he talked to me, he said, my problem is I have all these things that I have to deal with. He had alimony and child support, and he had to deal with house payments and all of those other things. And he said, well, he said, what do I do? How do I do that? And I said, well, okay, so to answer the question, I guess I have to ask, do you want the answer first if I'm you or if I'm me? He goes, well, is there a difference? I go, yeah, there's a big difference. He goes, well, all right, if you were me, what would I do? I go, if I were you, I would go take care of all those other things, alimony and house payments, and make certain that you do the right thing and stand up and take care of everyone else. And he said, well, yeah, but I'm miserable in this job. And I said, I understand that. I said, that gets to, if it were me, what I would do. So I told him the story about the only job that I ever really had. It was a job right after I left the mayor's office. Again, I don't want to mention the name, but a beautiful human being who had decided to invest hundreds of millions of dollars into a foundation, asked for me for my help, and I gave him help. I helped him put together the original thesis of the foundation and what they were going to invest in and what projects that they would work on. And I remember I walked in one day after I'd been there 4 or 5 weeks, and when I walked into the meeting, I was about 10 or 15 minutes late, which if you know me, you know unfortunately, that's not untraditional. But he looked at his watch, put it down, and I remember thinking immediately, I quit. All right, I'm not going to be on somebody else's watch.
Not to be dehumanized by another person or have somebody own you.
And by the way, he did nothing wrong. This was a beautiful, beautiful human being. So I told him that I was going to leave. And he said, well, what's the problem? And I said, well, I just really want to do my own thing. And he said, Paul, I'll pay you more. What is it that I need to do? I really want to make this work. How do I keep you here? And I said, look, I'm making really good money here. I'm not going to tell you what he was paying me. I said, but if I only made $25,000 a year and had to live in a trailer, I'm going to be in business for myself.
The liberation.
Right? Now, I did not realize when I told him that, he saw that as an insult. Right? He a year or two later, he didn't talk to me much for a year or two. I figured he was just mad because I'd left. But he asked for a meeting with me, and he said, all right, I need to know why you left. And I said, well, I wanted to go do my own thing. He says, yeah, but you told me that you didn't like me. I go, I never told you I didn't like you. He says, yes, you did. You said you'd work for $25,000 and live in a trailer before you'd work for me. Yeah. And I said, no.
Kind of like divorcing your wife.
You misunderstood me. I said, look, I just meant that I wanted to do my own thing. I didn't want to work on somebody else's clock.
Freedom.
I wasn't exaggerating when I said to him, I'd live on $25,000 a year and live in a trailer before I would work for someone else. Now, again, back to my other friend who was trying to deal with the same issue. Here's the first question. Are you willing to make that sacrifice? Right? Look, wealth building is not that hard. It really isn't. People misunderstand the wealth building. First, it's defining what is that to you, right? So if you say, you know what I want? I want to become wealthy. Oh, okay. How much money is that? Well, it's $1 million, right? Well, I promise you, when you get to $1 million, it'll be 5. And I promise you, when you get to 5, and when you get to 5 million, it'll be 10.
It'll never be enough.
John D. Rockefeller once said, they asked him the question, they said, okay, you're close to one of the country's first billionaires. How much more do you need? And he thought about it for a second. He said, just a little bit more, right? By the way, he had a nervous breakdown after that.
Yeah.
He lived in his house for 2 years and wouldn't see anybody.
Because you never get to that place.
You never get there.
Of where it's
right?
enough.
If the goal is that you want financial independence, well, financial independence can be done for a lot less than you might imagine, right? There's a great series, I think it's on HBO, but it's about minimalist. These people who they put together a life that after working for 30 or 40 or 50,000 a year for 2 or 3 years, they can save enough that they don't have to work again. You would be amazed at how cheap you can do it if that's your goal. You go into business because you want the freedom, not just the financial freedom, but the freedom to be able to own what it is that you create, to solve big problems, to know that what you have is yours, to know that you suffered the pains when it went down and that you gained the joys when it went up, to know it's not just financial independence, it is independence, right? I have to have that, right? And if you don't have to have that, well, there are other ways to build wealth, right? Here's rule number 1. Spend less than you make. That's rule number 1, right? Invest that money. Now, you can go invest that money in growth ventures or in risk ventures, like what I've done with businesses. But I would tell you the first thing that you should do, invest in the dollar amount that you're going to need to be able to take care of you long term. The things that are safe, right? Treasury notes and city CDs and those types of things that will give you a return on the money that you're investing. It's much safer than what you would normally gain, that what you would normally invest in. But it makes certain that you're taken care of. Just those simple investments. By the way, one great book, and we'll do a bunch of books in this because I really believe that entrepreneurship, as you know, I make all of my mentorees read a whole series of books. But one of them is The Millionaire Next Door.
Yeah, that's a great book.
I love the story about the bus driver who never made more than $6,000 or $7,000 a year. But he decided he wanted to put his kids through Harvard or the Ivy League schools. So instead of reading the sports pages every night, he would read the financial investment pages. And he took, I think it was literally half of his income, and invested it in stocks. Now, he happened to pick the right stocks. I don't remember what they were, but it was like Microsoft and Apple and Southwest Airlines, right? And these stocks grew dramatically. Right? Interestingly enough, he put all of his kids through Ivy League schools. And then when he retired, he had millions of dollars in his bank account. Retired as a bus driver, he had millions of dollars. It caused so much concern, they investigated him, right? Because the answer was, how can you have that much money as a bus driver? Here's the answer. Spend less than you make, right? Invest a portion of it. That's rule 1. And that's also rule 1 for a business. If you want to create a business, you have to get to the point where you're going to have enough oxygen to be able to survive those early years where it will be a challenge. Now, there are multiple ways to do that. Here's the first one. Get your expenses really, really low. Yeah. Right? My comment to my friend when he said, yeah, but if you do that, then you're not going to pay your alimony payment and you're not going to pay your house payment. I go, yeah, well, it's just going to be a lot cheaper house. All right? And I'm going to go renegotiate with people. There's a reason in an airplane. They tell you, hey, put that oxygen mask on yourself first. For me, if you smother me, you're not going to get anything out of me because I can't deal with it. All right? That being in that type of a cage is not something that would work for me. But I know if you give me that independence, I can make up for it. All right? I'm going to have a short-term problem. Short-term problem is It's going to take me a while to be able to get that business built up. So for a new business, what I would start by advising them is, hey, why don't you keep working your other job until you get a couple of $1,000s worth of income coming into the business where you can see, hey, people will buy this product. And once you know they'll buy this product, then it's worthwhile to leave your job and go spend full time on making that work.
And I was thinking, what kind of advice would you give somebody who came to you and had the ambition and the passion, but they lacked the skills, they lacked the knowledge, they lacked the experience, but they wanted to start their own business. And you could see the eagerness in them. And you could see the likelihood of them failing. What would you suggest to that person?
So my first recommendation to every mentoree is to listen to what it is that they want and trying to understand, especially if they think that they're after wealth, is to try to get them to understand how evasive that is, how illusory that whole concept is. But once they get that down and they go, no, I'm really willing to make the sacrifice and I really have saved up some money and I have some oxygen that I can get through a bad period of time, the question always arises, what business? Well, usually the first business you should go into is something that you're an expert in. That doesn't mean you're an expert at the business. That means that you're an expert at that thing. So as an example, 12 years ago when my partner Dave Berg and I first started talking to you and you were talking to us about you were a psychologist and then you told us some paltry amount of money that people were paying you after putting massive amounts of money into getting your PhD. I was stunned. I was like...
My PsyD, the doctorate in
First,
psychology.
I wanted to know, where do I hire people like that? Where do I get PhDs that will work for me that cheap, right?
$24,000 a year
right?
on my internship.
All right, but and the answer was you can make $200-$300 an hour. You just have to go get customers.
Yeah.
Now you were afraid, right?
Yes.
So I mean, you might talk about that experience, but you were afraid to be able to step into it. What I knew was that you already had income because you already had clients. You were an expert in that field. But you had to take that next step, creating the business. And that's a whole different set of risks. But once you learn that aspect of it, the creation of the business, I just had no doubt that you could be successful at it. So the first thing that I try to tell people after we get through that wealth discussion is, okay, what's your expertise? All right, what is it that you're really good at? If the answer is nothing, gosh, that's a lot harder to put together a business on. But if you're an expert at mowing lawns, you've mowed lawns before, you can build a pretty good business off of lawn mowing, right? If you're an expert at cutting hair, you can build a pretty good business off of cutting hair. If you're a doctor, you can build a great business off of being a doctor, right? But so many people, they get caught in that golden cage. Now, I don't know if you know the story of the golden cage, but it's the story of this king goes into a village and he decides to run an experiment. So he takes this guy who has a wife and 3 children and a couple of sons, and he basically abducts him. He takes him to the palace, beautiful palace, right? And he puts him inside this cage. It's a golden cage. And the guy is depressed and upset, and he says, he goes, you're going to sit here next to me, and you're going to get all the same thing that I get. So the entertainers would come in, and he would watch the entertainers. He got all the great food that the king had. He had all the luxuries that the king had, all the best clothing. And years went by, right? And he started to enjoy some of those things, even though he was in this cage. And then finally one day the king said, okay, so here's the deal. It's time for me to let you go. You can go back and see your wives and your wife and your daughters and your sons and go back to the life that you had. However, once you walk out of that cage, you can never come back. You can never come back in the palace. You can never have the food that we eat again. You could never have the clothing or watch the entertainment. You just go back to that other life. It's your choice. Well, the guy was so stressed by it, right? He was like, oh my gosh, this has been amazing, but I miss my wife and my children, and I'm not sure what to do. And he kept going over it, and he started to get a headache because it was just so much thought. And he goes, you know what, I'm going to go to sleep on it, and then I'll try to answer this question tomorrow. legend has it, he never got out of that cage. He spent the rest of his life there. No way are you putting me in a golden cage.
Yeah, there's that temptation and seduction. But as you were saying, it's all that illusion. And I think that question that you posed before is really important. And I see a lot of the clients that I have, and they're at the point of starting up a business, and they've invested a lot of time and done a lot of research and hired a bunch of consultants and paid a lot of money to people to help them be successful. And they have this image in their mind that, when I make $1 billion, and I'm going to have all of these wonderful things and all these luxuries, and knowing that that's their driving factor, wondering, like, how are they going to learn at what point, like, where their purpose is and what is really going to be driving or motivating them. And I think making money is not a bad motivation, and I think a lot of people have that as a motivation. What would you recommend to that person who comes to see you and says, well, no, that is my purpose?
I've gotten to know some of our country's best business people. And I say our country because I do think that with oligarchs and with political parties, your connections make more of a difference. It's not what really makes you a great business person in the United States. Almost none of them started off, that I know, with, I want to be a billionaire. Some of them became billionaires multiple times over. But they didn't start with that goal. They started with providing a product, and they wanted to provide an exceptional product. They wanted to try, they were so obsessed with that product being good. And they also fit into a need that was in the marketplace, and they figured out how to make those two things work. If you're motivated only to make money, I will be surprised if you do. Now, my guess is there's exceptions to that, right? My guess is if that's your only thing that you want to do, you got to go to work in Wall Street and high five your friends every time you rip some pension fund off of some extra money, right? It's like I said, the bankers, I think, live in a completely different world than people who produce products and goods. So I just think that that's the wrong starting place. I know I won't mentor them, but I won't mentor them because it doesn't fit my code, the code that's important to me to be able to help. But I've also found with people that when they come to me and they'll say, well, I want to be a billionaire. I'll say, okay, well, let's set that aside, all right? A billion, at least you gave me a number, right? Wealthy is a terrible number, right? Because even at $1 billion, you won't be at enough. But I said, at least you've given me a number. Let's go to the next part, like in what type of product? And then they'll tell me the product. I go, well, how does that make a difference in people's lives? And they struggle with that. Well, I don't know how it makes a difference. Well, you need to figure it out.
Yeah.
You need to figure out why this makes a difference in people's lives. All right, so when you get them through the first two items, you've had the wealth discussion so that they get their values right. What is it that they're really trying to do? What is it that they're really trying to accomplish? And again, it should be based more upon independence than it should be wealth. It should be based upon things that you can actually help determine what the actual outcome is. The second thing is that you've defined your product. And again, most people's products are going to be something that they're exceptional in. Now, I'm going to give a couple of caveats to that. I went into the healthcare business. I'm not an expert at healthcare. I can tell you what I am an expert at. The law. All right, I'm an expert at reading legislation, understanding what it was that the ACA was trying to do and what it is that ERISA did, and things that most people see as being trivial. But understanding that framework in a highly regulated industry was important. But
and how it impacted business owners.
That's right. But I still was not a doctor. I still was not a provider. I still didn't understand those issues. I co-partnered or co-founded the company with two people who are exceptional at that end, right? And it's been through that mix that we've been able to assist one another. In most cases, I do recommend that you should have a co-founder in your business. Now, I didn't recommend that for you because you were a psychologist. All you had to do is get through the business portion of it. But if you'd had to raise a lot of capital, or if you had to deal with a bunch of regulatory issues, if you'd had other challenges, I probably would have recommended a co-founder for your business as well. If you decide that you're going to go into a technology business and you say, I think that I really understand well, we have young guys that have gone into creating a business on property management that they're trying to create a software for. but their co-founder is somebody who's a software designer, right? The co-founder makes sense because a lot of businesses take the integration of a variety of different skills. But after you've gotten through that part...
And I do rely on a lot of relationships to do what I do, which I can talk more about later. But
now,
yeah, it's different than a co-founder.
Here's the third thing. This is so important. Sell something, right?
I remember you telling me that, yes.
Yeah, the one thing that a business owner has to do, at least in my opinion, they need to keep their eye on the sales and marketing process throughout the entire life of their company. Now, sometimes they'll think that they don't need to because it starts to perform, it starts to do well. But the product and markets are changing all the time. And because they're changing, if you're not on that front line understanding what's happening, you'll miss those changes. You'll miss what it is that the customer sees that they want or what it is that they need. The very first thing that someone going into business needs to do is sell something. All right. So again, I advise people all the time, keep the existing job that you have. And if this is what you want to do, go see if you can sell it and sell it for under the value of what other people will do. But once you go through that process, getting the product priced correctly is one element. But there are other elements which are, hey, is this really what the customer wanted? What were the friction points? What are the challenges to being able to get this operationally to work? The product that we're providing, does it solve all the problems? Are there other products that I could sell alongside of it that might make sense and help the customer as well? When you sell something, you begin to gain a completely different understanding of your product. Now, employees don't have to do that. They work inside of companies, and if they're not in sales, their job is to work on operational issues or accounting issues or other issues. They're not really involved in understanding what does the customer want and what do they need. As you begin to grow as an employer, I would tell you that becomes overwhelmingly the place where you can make the biggest difference. Look, if you want to get a 10 times growth factor or a 30 times growth factor, it's going to come from your sales. That's where you're going to get it. Now, sales can have operational issues to it, meaning if you're providing a poor product and the customer doesn't like it, well, then your operations is having an effect on your sales. And conversely, if you're creating a great product and it's really good, you will get some referrals from other people. But understanding how those sales work, you'll find in most businesses, people tend to think that their sales come from one area. I get my sales. If it's a B2B, business to business, you're getting your sales because you have some intermediary between you and another business, and they're helping you get it. Could be a broker, could be a friend, it could be any one of a number of things. All right. So you don't really sell online. You don't really sell through any type of marketing. Here's the challenge with that. If that one group goes away, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
You have a problem. You put a lot of risk
in
that
your income.
All right. And how do you diversify that? Well, sometimes it's creating different products, but almost always it's about creating different lines and different ways that you sell it. And then I found this to be true over and over again.
And so much of this is experimental.
It's all testing. There's another great book called Lean Startup. And in Lean Startup, he focused really more on technology companies where you would create this technology and then you'd put it off online and you try to sell something and then and you wouldn't put a huge amount of money into the website or into the marketing until you know that people would buy it. Well, that's not just true for website companies. That is true for almost anything that you're trying to sell. Keep your investment very low while you're testing and test it and see what it is that you can sell and see what the customer wants. And once you know that a customer says, hey, I'd buy it if you just did this, then consider making the next level of investment. But sell something. That's the third step. And that step has to reverberate through your business the entire time that you own it. It's constantly focusing on it. I have found over and again that if you're doing a social ad and you just run this social ad and you're having success with it, sometimes you can just change the title or just change the first paragraph and it dramatically shifts how many sales that you can make. Now, sometimes those are binary, meaning you can sell under both new lines. Sometimes it's A or B, right? And you end up creating this change and you go, I don't really need the old ad because this new ad is working now for me really well by just changing that opening paragraph. Customers do not buy from you your product. That is the most common mistake that businesses make. They think people buy from me because they like my product. No, that's not why people buy from you. People buy from you because you do something that improves their life. It's about them. It's not about you, and it's not about your product, right?
Yes.
So you'll see people put up these, they've created this beautiful thing, and they want to have everybody see this beautiful thing, and so they spend tons of time trying to show the back end of this, and look at all the things that we're doing that make this work. If I had to explain to you the back end of how a healthcare company works, first, I couldn't get it done in an hour podcast. And second, you wouldn't listen to me because you'd go, that's all about you.
It's not helping the listener.
Right?
Yeah.
And
Why
again,
would somebody
my
focus on
partner, he's magical on operational issues. He really is. He's just exceptional at it. But that's not what the customer cares about. They do care about the outcome and how it affects their life. But they don't really care about the details about how you got there. They just don't. They don't care about the regulations. They don't care about the rules. In fact, they want the least amount of time and exposure to you as they possibly have to have. And they're not interested in the product.
So let's talk about mistakes and failures and vulnerabilities, because I think that could be helpful for listeners, especially people who are looking at starting a business or who have a business, thinking about expanding it or trying something different. The fear of failure. And what would you say are some common pitfalls that you see people hitting, or even yourself and your experiences with different businesses you've had? What would be some of the common mistakes? And maybe you have some personal stories to share. I think that could be illuminating. And then what gifts of wisdom could you offer listeners based on that?
I've had a lot of people ask me, hey, how do I get to where you've gotten to? How do I get to financial independence and to be able to build up the wealth that you have and to be able to own my own business and to do the things that you've done? And here's my first answer to them. The only thing between me and them is fear. They're afraid, right? Now, if their fear is, well, I don't want to fail. No chance. I failed so many times it's not even funny, right? It's through failure that I've learned a lot. I can tell you there are a couple of times I wished I'd had a better mentor and better advisor, because I think I could have saved myself some of the failures that I wouldn't have needed had I listened to them. Hubris is a big problem. You start getting full of yourself and you start not paying as much attention to the details. You don't focus on the things that matter, and then all of a sudden you find yourself in trouble as well. But the fear of being willing to make those mistakes and the fear of not always being successful keeps many, many people who are much more talented than I am from being able to go into business. I had again, I don't want to mention a name, but I had a provider who literally made millions of dollars or close to $1 million a year on doing surgeries. And I will never forget, he asked me the question. He said, I'm really kind of struggling. I said, okay, what are you struggling with? He said, well, I'm struggling with the idea that I did really well in school and I've worked really hard to get to where I am, and I work for you. Right? I don't know if he meant to be as insulting as he was, but I kind of laughed about it, and I said, okay. So we talked about it, and he said, yeah, I just don't understand why I'm not doing the same thing that you're doing. And I said, okay, well, let me ask you a question. I said, you're a surgeon. I'll bet you did really well in high school. He says, oh, I was valedictorian. I said, oh, that's awesome. I said, I'll bet you did really well in college, too. He goes, oh, yeah. He says, I was summa cum laude. I said, oh, that's awesome. I said, I know I have lots of doctors who work for us, lots of providers. You're a surgeon. You must have even done well at medical school. He goes, oh, graduated in the top 1%. I said, you know what? I'll bet you're a success at almost everything you do, aren't you? He says, I take a lot of pride in that. I'm always a success. I said, well, there you go.
That's the difference.
I fail every single day. I fail with an employee. I fail because I get ahead of myself. I fail because I took the wrong risk. I fail because I put money into something that I shouldn't have put money into, right? I fail every day. Now, to be honest with you, in the job that he's in, I don't really want him failing every single day. That's not a good thing.
That's a human life.
Right? But his mindset has become so much so that taking risks, it's been trained out of him. The challenge to that is if you don't take risks, you can't be in business. You have to be able to take risks. And some of those risks you can't control. One of the things that we do is we build surgery centers for our businesses. We haven't been building them lately, but I recall when we talked about the surgery center that we were going to allow him to invest in. He said, well, okay, so what determines your success? I said, inflation. He said, how does inflation determine the success of a surgery center? I said, well, I have to build it at the right price. I have to be really tough on the contractors for change orders. I have to buy the land right. I have to make certain that I've put together a lease inside our business. My business has to keep doing well. But if inflation is higher, that raises the cap rate. The cap rate's what people buy it on. So if somebody buys that revenue stream, which is done on an annualized basis on an 8 cap, it literally is half the price if they buy it on a 4 cap. And if you have high inflation, you have high interest. With high interest, you're going to have a higher cap rate, but it means the building's worth less. All right. His answer was, well, how do you control that? The answer is you can't.
Yeah.
You can't control that. All right, what I can do is create a structure where I know that financially I'll be okay even through that bad cycle. So the key to being able to get through a bad cycle as a business is oxygen. How are you going to be able to keep making your payments? All right, how are you going to be in a position where you either have enough cash and liquidity to be able to make certain that you can take care of it, or the payment's so low that you don't have to worry about it? Where people get in trouble, always in business and in real estate, is they over-leverage. Right? Now, over-leveraging can be a great thing on the way up. On the way up, people make a lot of money by over-leveraging, but it's a rough ride on the way down. How do I know? Oh, because I have a PhD. I have a PhD in the hard knocks of business administration. I've had my butt kicked so many times on so many things that there's just a lot of lessons that I've been able to take from it. For me, oh my gosh, it's been a wonderful ride. Every single thing I learned in that process was valuable to me. It was fascinating to me, trying to understand how that fit into a bigger picture and how free markets work. Look, free markets have done more to lift people out of poverty and out of illiteracy and to improve child mortality rates. It's done so much for the planet. Having a micro understanding of how that works has been wonderful as far as I'm concerned. But it's because I like learning. I like understanding. And I like knowing that once I do understand and once I get better at it, that I'll be able to do better financially long term because I won't make the same mistakes. But it seems like once I figure out one set of mistakes, there's actually a whole new set of things that you have to worry about. But that's the joy to business. And if your temperament is, I can't take that, well, then here's what you do. You go to work for an employer and you think that you don't have those same problems. But I have a little surprise for you. You do. You're just not the one who knows about them on an hourly basis. Mm-hmm. You find out about it a year later when the business closes down, right? We all have risk. The employee and the employers all have risk. A good employer is careful about not making his employees stressed all the time, so he's not giving them the bad news on a minute-by-minute basis. But the business person usually knows on a minute-by-minute basis what the risks are. And in almost every business, there's always risks, and some of them are huge and constant. The ones that are usually huge and constant are the ones that are making the most money.
Yeah, and I just think about, what is sustainable, and every person has a different threshold for what they can tolerate in terms of risks. You are unique, and while you might be a model for some, I think that not everyone can really live up to the standards that you've raised for yourself. And so I think it really depends on that person to say, really, there's nothing wrong with having a steady income and having a steady job. If you're having to pay child support or alimony payments, or if you're trying to feed a big family and 5 kids and you just want to make sure that you have the insurance to be able to cover them, that it's okay that you might want to start a small business on the side, but really looking at taking low risk. And so having that personal assessment of what is it that I need, How do I survive? What do I have to experiment with? And how much risk am I really willing to take? And I remember a lot of the fears when I started my private practice. I think, for me, I had the model, psychology had the model for private practices, and it wasn't like I was creating something out of thin air. I really was able to copy and I didn't have to reinvent anything. I really could just take the model of a private practice and implement it, and see the different relationships that I want to build and really nurture those relationships. And knowing what to say no to was just as important as what to say yes to. And I think that was something that you helped me be able to define. Like, what do I want to invest my energy in? What am I offering that is unique? How am I setting myself apart from everyone else that is in this niche? What am I offering that is me? And the more that I got to experiment with that and define it and then redefine it, I think helped to build something that I felt like I was giving something valuable back to community.
So I'm going to go back to your original question, then I'll try to cover this thing that you said last. Anyone can be in business. Not everyone should be. That's a key. Now, for those people who are in business, here's what I would say to you. I hear from people all the time who complain about their employees not understanding the stress that they're under, the risks that they're under, the challenges that they're under. And here's my answer to them. So man up or woman up, right? That's the way it works. They're never going to understand. You're in business. So this works the other direction. We service those employees too, right? We service those employees who are complaining about their job, who think that we're greedy capitalists, who think that we take all the money out of it, not understanding the risks, the downside, all the problems that we face on a daily basis. They never will. So the only thing that you can do is to listen to them and be kind to them, and to know part of why they work for me is because they don't want to worry about all those problems. So I don't spend time talking to them about it. Second, I would tell you that as I started this conversation, one of the very first things that you need to do is to define, what do you want? What is it that you're after? Everyone can make themselves financially independent. Everyone can. Everyone should make themselves financially independent, and you don't need to go into business to do that. What do you need to do? Rule number one, spend less than you make. Now people say, well, you can't do that. I've just seen too many people on very low amounts of money that have done that, that have made that work. Now, that may mean you don't get the car you want. That may mean that you have to take a bus. That may mean that the house that you want isn't the house that you want. That may mean that you're putting off a lot of the good things that you'd like to have. But if you do that and you invest that money long term, you will do well. I look at the rule as, we had a great economist on here who I really enjoyed, Larry Summers, and I spoke to him and a guy named Elliot Pollack about, hey, do we really have the ability to be mobile in our economy? Can people from the bottom move to the top? Larry, who was more liberal, Elliot Pollack, who's more conservative, both said, absolutely. This is if you compare this to other economies around the world, this is a very mobile nation. We have the ability to move from the bottom to the top. Now, here are the things that I would tell you are absolutely essential to move from the bottom to the top. Number one, overwhelmingly, you need to work hard. All right. If you, even as a waitress, you need to work hard. Even as a construction worker, you need to work hard. Number two, you need to make certain that you take advantage of every educational program that you can. Get yourself as advanced as you possibly can. Number three, you need to spend less than you make and invest that money. And then number four, whoever that you couple with, whoever it is that you take on as your life partner, you got to make sure that they have the exact same goals, because if they don't, it'll just eat up what it is that you're doing. But if you do those things, you work hard, you spend less than you actually make, and you make certain that you take advantage of educational programs so that you can move up and get more advancement, you can easily move from the bottom quartile to the second to the top.
Yeah, and I remember when I was making that shift, a couple things that really helped me, and I think of these as massive support systems and protective factors for me, is that I joined the running groups in the morning, and I joined the business mentoring groups, and started reading more, especially on entrepreneurship and business. And all of those things helped to propel me to think about, how do I want to change my life in that direction?
So you were afraid in the beginning. I remember that fear distinctly. Why?
Well, I came out of my doctoral program with a $250,000 debt, and payments were starting to be made, and I was earning $24,000 a year with my internship. I was living at home with my parents, and I'm thinking, how am I going to even build anything starting on such an immense debt? I own nothing. I have no savings.
But there's an illogic to that, right?
Yeah.
So I'm going to keep doing the $24,000 a year where I'll never be able to pay that $250,000 loan off, right? So the question is, I mean, I know you made the transformation, but I recall you arguing back and forth with Dave and I on a number of occasions as to why we didn't understand what was going on. Do you look back on it now and think that we really didn't understand, or do you look back on it and think that you were overcome by fear? What was the issue?
Yeah, the fear was, I didn't have the confidence in myself to believe that I can do it and that I could survive it. That I didn't have the confidence even of the mentors in my psychological community that I should do it.
Oh, by the way, doctors, that they're infamous on that, on looking down at the people who do.
And that hurt my confidence, because these are people I really respect and admire and learn from, and they've given me so much knowledge and wisdom and training and education and support, and I think, well, they know better than me. So if they don't think that I'm ready for this, why should I? And so that was hard to also
And what
overcome.
finally gave you the courage to do it?
That I had the support of my family. I had the support of you. I had the support of Dave, that there was a break, that you and Dave had given me this opportunity to have a beautiful real estate at no cost for a few months, and then at a reduced cost for another several months until I could start paying the actual value of it. And I thought, well, they're willing to invest in me and lose money on me. So I better work my butt off to make sure that I can stay and continue to pay them. And that people said, oh, we'll refer people to you. We think that you're helpful in this area. And actually, we've seen you help and give advice to this family member. And we had this other family member struggling with mental illness and substance use and addictions and other problems. We'll refer people to you. And so when I saw that people were starting to commit to helping me and sending me referrals, and that I saw, wait a minute, I can do this. And so it took time to develop that confidence in myself. And I remember spending endless hours in my office and just thinking of different programs I could create. Well, let me create something for police officers. Let me create something for firefighters. And this bill just passed for trauma-informed care for first responders. Let me capitalize on different things as times and trends were changing. And I started looking at working with different people and collaborating with different people. I started giving a lot of free trainings and workshops and doing a lot of research on those. And so I built on that with more exposure. And so people started to have some confidence in me. And really, in our industry, credibility is all you have. And one thing could happen, even if it's a rumor, even if it's a mistake, a true human error, that could destroy your professional career, especially in the forensic arena. which is where I do a lot of my work. I do clinical work in addition. But really, credibility is all we have. And so that is so illusory. I may have a PsyD, a doctorate of psychology behind my name, but if I'm not being referred by somebody who trusts me to send their family member to me, to send their son or their daughter or their wife or their husband, that is the biggest amount of trust.
All right, so let me give you what I saw. The first thing that I saw was, let's go back to this question of money, right? If you had defined success as how much money you were going to make, you would have never gotten out of the gate. You instead you were living on a very low amount of money. You were living on $24,000 a year and paying your student debt, right? Part of that was you were still living with your parents,
yes,
right?
That helped
but
immensely.
That helped,
That's a protective
right? That's
factor.
oxygen, right?
Yes.
So
and
you didn't have
support.
a huge number that you had to make to be able to do that. So that was number one.
At 40 years old.
Yeah. So by the way, everything before 40 is practice. It's okay. All right. So that was number one. The second thing that you did is you went into an area where you already understood the basics of psychology, right? You didn't understand business at all, but you understood the basics of psychology. So that's the second part that happened. Number three, you were willing to sell something, all right? You stepped out before you bought a bunch of stuff. You sold a couple of clients. You made some money. You had money coming in. Number four, you created great mentors in the process, right? You brought in people and listened to them. And it just wasn't Dave and I. I watched you talk to other people in the running group and other people that you tried to gain understanding from. Look, what one person can do, so can another. Study how that person did it, and you can get there. And here's the great thing about business.
And learn
a
from their
lot of
mistakes.
people have done business. There's lots of people who can give you advice, but they can't get you to overcome your fear. The mentor can give you the confidence to be able to try it. But at the end of the day, if your fear is, I can't do this, if it means that I might be a failure, well, if you can't fail, business usually isn't the right place to go. Because as you said, you lined out, I recall you had like 20 different avenues that you were going after for a business.
Yeah.
And I kept telling you, focus, right? But I understand why you did those 20, right? You were trying to figure out which one of these fronts can I open up? And once you open it up, then you were going to pour your resources into that. Now, again, you had a good understanding of cultural differences of people. You had multiple languages that you spoke: Arabic, Hebrew, French, English. Right, those were all helpful. You had some access or some experience in working with Arabs, which helped you kind of on the terrorist issue, being able to get into the forensic work early on, which took you to capital crimes and other things. So once you opened up that market, then the question became, you had to start to say, wait a minute, here's what I do. Here's what I focus on. Point I guess I would give to you is, that's the exact model. And, there are great mentorship programs that exist that, I like focusing on trying to mentor people who haven't taken that first step, who are afraid to get to that next level, that I see potential in, that I know that they could do it if they wanted to.
It is intimidating. I was intimidating. And like I said, I lacked the confidence in myself. And yet, I tried. Yeah. And I saw that people believed in me and were willing to support me. And I thought, well, I really don't have a lot to lose. I'm already at the bottom.
All right. So I know we need to close this up. At our next, at one of our future podcasts, we'll talk a little bit more about, once you've gone into business, what the details are of that. All right?
Sounds great.
All right. Thanks, Emily. And I guess you should be thanking me because this was your podcast.
Thank you, Paul, for sharing your stories
you're welcome.
and your insights. And I think, just one thing I want to say that I know from being a recipient of your mentorship, I think the greatest gift that you can give another person is the inspiration and the belief in them. And I just want to thank you for giving that to me.
It's been my honor. Thank you. Thanks for joining the Optimistic American Show. Help us grow by subscribing to our channel. If you enjoyed the episode, please leave a like and a comment. There is so much more that we have planned, and we can't wait for you to embark upon this journey with us.